station always had rules. No one paid them much mind, until I broke one. The first rule was simple: never stay past midnight. I never questioned it. Why would I? But on August 12th, I ignored it. The dim lights flickered as I sat at my desk, the soft hum of static in my headphones. The clock struck 12:01, and I felt a strange chill run down my spine. The air around me grew thick, and the usual comforting sounds of late-night radio felt off. As I continued working, I heard something. No, someone, whispering through the static. It wasn't clear, more like fragmented words scattered in the noise. I brushed it off, thinking it was my tired mind playing tricks on me. But then it happened again, louder this time. A single word stood out: leave. My hands trembled as I adjusted the dial, hoping to fix the issue, but the whisper only grew stronger, more insistent. I glanced around the empty station. Everything looked the same: old equipment, dusty consoles, and the soft red glow of the on-air light. Yet, something felt terribly wrong. I was alone, or so I thought. My heartbeat quickened as the lights flickered again, and the whispers turned into a soft, almost melodic hum, echoing from the far end of the studio. It was coming from the door to the back room, the one that no one ever opened. With a deep breath, I stood up, the fear growing inside me. My hands felt cold, my legs unsteady as I approached the door. The closer I got, the louder the hum became, until it was all I could hear. I reached for the door handle, my heart pounding in my chest. What could possibly be behind that door? And why did the station have these strange rules in the first place? The door was heavier than I expected. As it creaked open, the hum stopped abruptly, replaced by an unsettling silence. Inside the room, there was nothing but old equipment covered in layers of dust. The air was stale, and a faint smell of mold lingered. At first glance, it seemed like just another forgotten part of the station. But as I stepped inside, I noticed something strange. A small radio was tucked away in the corner, still turned on, emitting only static. I walked closer, drawn to the old machine. It was different from the others. Older, maybe from the 60s or 70s, with wooden casing and large knobs. As I reached out to turn it off, the static changed again. The whisper returned, louder this time, clear enough to make out a single phrase: "Don't look back." My breath caught in my throat as I froze in place. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and a cold sweat broke out on my skin. I didn't move. My hand hovered over the radio, the warning still echoing in my mind. Something wasn't right. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. I felt anchored to that spot, my feet rooted to the floor. Slowly, I turned the knob on the radio, trying to adjust the signal. The static morphed into something else, faint music, like an old, warped record playing a song I didn't recognize. But beneath the music, the whispering continued, relentless and terrifying. I looked around the room again, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move in the corner of my eye. My heart raced as I backed away from the radio, the whispers now a full-blown chant, almost like a warning. The words became clearer. He's here. He's watching. Panic surged through me. I spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing there. Just me, the old equipment, and that damn radio. Fear gripped me as I realized I had broken one of the rules, and now something was coming. But what? I didn't wait to find out. I bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind me. But as I ran through the darkened halls of the station, the static followed me, echoing in my ears. I could feel it now. Something watching me, following my every move. I wasn't alone anymore. The further I ran from that room, the louder the static became, filling my mind like a dull roar. I reached the main broadcast room and slammed the door behind me, leaning against it to catch my breath. My heart pounded in my chest, and my skin was clammy with fear. The station was quiet, but I could still feel it, whatever it was. I wasn't alone. I tried to focus on something familiar, anything that would ground me, but the static was everywhere. I took a deep breath and forced myself to sit back at my desk. My hands were shaking as I adjusted the microphone and flicked the station back on air. It was my only lifeline to the outside world. As the broadcast resumed, I realized something was wrong. The music that should have been playing had been replaced by that same eerie hum, followed by soft, garbled voices. I frantically switched between tracks, trying to regain control, but the voices persisted. They sounded more human now, like people speaking just out of reach. Then, out of nowhere, the hum stopped, and a voice came through the speakers, clear and calm, almost soothing. "We warned you," it said. "You broke the rule." My blood ran cold. I glanced around the room, but there was no one there. The voice continued, more insistent now, echoing from every speaker in the station. "You should have left when you had the chance." I stood up, backing away from the equipment, my mind racing. This wasn't a glitch or some prank. The station? It was alive, and whatever was behind those strange rules wasn't happy that I had disobeyed. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The air grew heavier with each passing second, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I needed to get out of there, but something kept pulling me back. Suddenly the lights flickered again, and I saw it. A shadow, fleeting but unmistakable, standing just outside the glass window that separated the booth from the hallway. It didn't move, but I could feel its presence, watching me with a cold, calculating gaze. My legs felt like lead as I forced myself to take a step forward. I had to leave before it was too late. I couldn't take my eyes off the shadow outside the booth. It stood still, as if waiting for me to make a move. My body was paralyzed with fear, but deep down, I knew I had to escape. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The static returned, louder and more chaotic than ever before, filling the station with an oppressive energy that seemed to close in on me from all sides. As I burst through the hallway, the air grew colder, almost suffocating. The shadow was gone, but I could feel something pursuing me, something unseen yet terrifyingly present. The whispers followed me, circling around my head like a dark cloud. They were louder now, almost deafening. "You broke the rule. You can't leave now." The words were no longer distant or fragmented. They were clear, forceful, and inescapable. I reached the main door, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the lock. The whispers grew more urgent, their tone harsher, like they were trying to stop me. With a final burst of effort, I wrenched the door open and stumbled outside into the night. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time in what felt like hours, the static stopped. The whispers ceased. The suffocating pressure lifted, and I was standing in the parking lot, free from the station's grip. I gasped for breath, my body trembling with relief. The silence outside was almost surreal after the overwhelming noise inside. I glanced back at the building, half expecting to see that shadow lurking by the entrance, but there was nothing. just the old, decaying radio station sitting quietly under the night sky. I didn't wait around to find out if whatever was in there would come after me again. As I got into my car and drove away, I realized something. The station was more than just an old building with strange rules. It was alive, feeding on the fear of those who broke the rules. But I had escaped. I had survived. The further I drove from the station, the lighter I felt, as if the dark presence that had been following me was finally gone. I would never return to that place again, and I would never break the rules again. For now, I was free. It was a lonely shift, working nights at a radio station deep in the woods. The station had a reputation, not just for its isolation, but for the strange signals it picked up on certain frequencies. I had been there long enough to hear the rumors from other employees, but I never paid them much attention until the night of September 15th. That night, I picked up something different, something I couldn't ignore. The broadcast was running smoothly when I first noticed it. A faint voice, almost like a whisper, breaking through the music. I checked the equipment, but everything seemed normal. Still, the voice persisted, growing clearer with each passing minute. I tried adjusting the frequencies, hoping to block it out, but nothing worked. The whispering only became louder, repeating a single phrase over and over. "Find me." A chill ran down my spine. I leaned closer to the console, listening intently, trying to make sense of the words. The voice was soft, almost pleading, and I could tell it wasn't part of any scheduled programming. My pulse quickened as I scanned the room, half expecting to see someone standing in the shadows, but I was alone. The station was eerily quiet, the only sound being the static between the songs and that whispering voice. I tried to shake off the unease. It was just interference, I told myself. But something in the back of my mind refused to let it go. The voice seemed too real. I couldn't explain it, but it felt as though it was directed at me, as if someone or something was trying to reach out through the airwaves. I pushed my headphones off, needing a break from the constant noise, but the voice continued. Now, it was coming through the speakers, filling the entire station with its haunting message. "Find me." I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest as the voice filled the room. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air thick with tension. I glanced out the window, hoping to see a passing car or some sign of life in the dense forest that surrounded the station, but there was nothing. Only darkness. The voice grew louder, more insistent, each repetition of "find me" sending a chill down my spine. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed a flashlight from the desk and headed toward the back of the station, where the old transmitter was located. It hadn't been used in years, replaced by newer, more modern equipment. But something told me that whatever was happening was tied to that ancient piece of machinery. The path to the transmitter was narrow and overgrown, the trees casting long shadows in the dim light of the moon. As I approached the transmitter, the voice became almost deafening. It was no longer a whisper, but a desperate plea, echoing through the static that seemed to surround me. The old transmitter tower loomed above, rusted and forgotten, a relic of another era. The ground beneath it was covered in dead leaves, and the air was damp and cold. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, but I couldn't turn back now. I stepped closer, shining my flashlight on the base of the tower. There, carved into the metal, were strange symbols, nothing I had ever seen before. They looked ancient, almost ritualistic. My stomach churned with unease. This was more than just a malfunctioning radio signal. Something far older and darker was at play here. The voice, now clearer than ever, spoke once more. "You're close. Don't stop." My hands shook as I reached out to touch the carvings. The moment my fingers brushed the cold metal, the voice stopped abruptly, and the air around me fell silent. But the silence wasn't comforting. It felt heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The symbols seemed to pulse under my fingertips, as if they were alive, connected to something much larger and more powerful than I could comprehend. And then, just as suddenly as it had stopped, the voice returned. But this time, it wasn't pleading. It was commanding. "Come closer." My heart raced as the voice commanded me to come closer. Every instinct told me to turn back, to run as far away from that cursed transmitter as possible. But something stronger, a force I couldn't explain, pulled me forward. My feet moved on their own, carrying me closer to the base of the tower. The carvings seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, pulsing in rhythm with the pounding of my heart. I kneeled down beside the transmitter, shining my flashlight over the strange symbols once more. The air was thick with tension, the silence almost unbearable. I could feel the weight of something watching me, its gaze heavy on the back of my neck. My breath came in shallow gasps as I ran my fingers over the carvings, tracing their jagged edges. The moment I did, the voice returned, stronger than before. "Open it." The words echoed in my mind, clear and unmistakable. I glanced around, but there was no one there. I was alone. At least, that's what I told myself. But the voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, surrounding me, pressing down on me. My hands trembled as I searched for something to open, but I saw nothing. Just the cold metal of the tower and the strange symbols etched into its surface. Then, almost instinctively, I pushed against one of the symbols. To my shock, the metal gave way beneath my touch, revealing a small, hidden panel at the base of the transmitter. My pulse quickened as I pried it open, revealing a small compartment inside. Nestled within the compartment was an old rusted key, its surface worn smooth from age. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. The moment I touched the key, the air around me shifted. The ground seemed to tremble beneath my feet, and the trees around me swayed as if caught in a sudden gust of wind. But there was no wind, just the oppressive stillness that seemed to hang in the air. I clutched the key tightly in my hand, feeling its weight, wondering what it could possibly unlock. The voice, now softer, whispered again, "You're almost there." The world around me felt wrong, like I'd crossed some invisible boundary into a place I didn't belong. The sense of being watched grew stronger, and I could feel my fear turning into something else, something darker. But I had come this far. I couldn't turn back now. Not when the voice still had its grip on me. The key was cold in my hand, and with every second that passed, I felt the weight of something unseen pressing down on me. The voice had gone silent again, but the sensation of being watched lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the small, rusted key, wondering what it could unlock. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. Then, almost on instinct, I felt the urge to return to the station. The transmitter loomed behind me as I walked back through the trees, the dense forest eerily quiet. My footsteps crunched on the dead leaves, the only sound in the stillness of the night. As I approached the station, the familiar building came into view, but something felt different. The lights inside were flickering, casting strange shadows that danced across the windows. When I stepped inside, the air was heavy, thick with an unnatural tension. The once familiar hum of the equipment was absent, replaced by an unsettling quiet. I moved through the narrow hallways, the key clutched tightly in my hand, searching for something, anything, that could explain what was happening. As I reached the old storage room at the back of the station, I felt it. The key had a purpose, and whatever it unlocked was here. I hesitated before pushing the door open, the old wood creaking under the pressure. Inside, the room was dark and filled with forgotten equipment, long since covered in dust. But in the corner, something caught my eye. A small, rusted lock on an old cabinet, a perfect match for the key in my hand. My breath caught in my throat as I approached it, my pulse quickening with each step. I knelt down, slid the key into the lock, and turned it slowly. The mechanism clicked open with a groan, and I pulled the cabinet door wide. Inside was a stack of old tapes, each one labeled with dates and strange symbols I didn't recognize. But at the top of the stack was something different. A single tape with my name scrawled across it in faded ink. My heart pounded as I lifted the tape from the cabinet, a sense of dread settling over me. I didn't understand how it was possible, but there it was, proof that whatever had been haunting this station had known I was coming all along. The tape felt heavier than it should have, as though it carried the weight of something far more sinister than just a recording. The voice returned, soft but clear. "Play it." I hesitated, my mind racing with fear. But I couldn't resist. With trembling hands, I placed the tape in the deck and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, but instead of static or an old broadcast, it was something else, something worse. The image on the screen was of me, sitting alone at the transmitter, holding that same rusted key. And then the video cut to black. The static returned, louder than ever, filling the room with its chaotic hum. The voice whispered one last time, barely audible above the noise. "Now you know, but you'll never leave." And just like that, the screen went dark. I sat there in the silence, trapped by the knowledge that I had found what the voice wanted me to find. But it didn't bring me peace. It brought me a mystery that I could never solve. The station had its hold on me now, and no matter how far I ran, I knew I could never truly escape. The radio station had seen better days. Nestled beside a slow-moving river, it was a relic of a forgotten era. Most people in town didn't even know it still operated, but for me, it was just a job, one that paid well enough to keep me afloat. On October 22nd, my shift started like any other, with the cold autumn air creeping in through the cracks of the old building. But that night was different. From the moment I walked in, I could feel something was off. The building was quiet, more so than usual. The river outside, normally a source of faint white noise, was eerily silent, as if even the water had stopped moving. I shrugged off the feeling, chalking it up to the solitude of the night shift. But as I settled into my chair and began the usual routine, something caught my eye. An old dusty reel of tape sitting on the edge of the console. It hadn't been there the night before, and no one else had been in the station for weeks. Curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up the reel, brushing off the thick layer of dust that clung to it. The label was faded, but I could just make out the words, "Final Broadcast." My stomach tightened. I had heard stories about a broadcast that had gone horribly wrong years ago. A tragic event that left the town in mourning, but I had never seen any actual evidence of it. This tape, could it be connected to that disaster? Against my better judgment, I set the reel onto the machine and pressed play. The static crackled to life, filling the room with its familiar hum. At first, there was nothing but white noise, and I thought maybe the tape was too old to be of any use. But then, faintly, I heard it. The sound of a voice, warped and distant, cutting through the static. I leaned in closer, straining to hear, when suddenly, the voice became clear. "This is the last broadcast. God help us all." A chill ran down my spine. The voice sounded broken, full of fear. I paused the tape, my heart racing. What had I just stumbled upon? The air in the station grew heavier, and for the first time, I felt truly alone, as if the walls themselves were closing in on me. I stared at the console, my hands frozen above the controls. The voice echoed in my head, "God help us all." It was unlike anything I had ever heard on air before. The weight of the tape seemed heavier now, as if it carried the remnants of a tragedy I wasn't meant to uncover. The room felt colder, the air dense with a suffocating silence. My instincts told me to stop, to leave the station and never come back. But something inside me, a deep curiosity, pushed me to continue. I pressed play again, and the tape resumed with more static, but soon the voice returned. It was calm now, almost resigned. "If anyone is listening, this is the end. The flood has reached the town. There's no time." My breath caught in my throat as I remembered the stories about the flood, how it swept through the town without warning, leaving destruction in its wake. The broadcast must have been recorded during those final moments, a desperate attempt to warn people. But why had it been hidden all this time? The static intensified, louder now, crackling and popping in a way that made my skin crawl. As the voice continued, it began to distort, shifting from clear words to something darker, more twisted. I leaned in closer, trying to decipher it, but all I could make out was a faint melody, a haunting tune that played beneath the static. It felt familiar, yet I couldn't place where I had heard it before. The more I listened, the more it seemed to pull me in, like a lullaby meant for something long forgotten. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the tape cut off, leaving only the low hum of the equipment. I sat there in the darkness, my mind racing with unanswered questions. What had really happened that night? And why did it feel like this tape was meant for me? The eerie calm in the station didn't feel like a relief. It felt like the calm before a storm. The silence after the tape cut off was suffocating, like the room itself was holding its breath. My hands trembled as I reached to rewind the tape, but a voice in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop. I pushed the chair back from the console, trying to gather my thoughts. What had I just heard? The melody still echoed in my mind, haunting and persistent. It wasn't just a broadcast. It felt like a warning, something meant to be buried with the past. I stood up and paced the small room, glancing toward the window, where the river outside moved sluggishly. The stories of the flood, of people disappearing without a trace, ran through my mind. I had always thought they were exaggerated tales passed down by the older generation, but hearing that voice, it made it all feel real. Too real. And now, it felt like I was connected to it somehow. As if by listening to the tape, I had stirred something that should have stayed forgotten. I considered leaving the station right then, abandoning the rest of my shift. But as I reached for my coat, the lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I froze. The station had never done that before, not in all the time I'd worked here. When the lights came back on, I felt an overwhelming urge to stay, as if the station itself wasn't ready to let me go just yet. I returned to the console, my fingers hovering over the play button once more. I didn't want to press it, but something deep inside compelled me. I needed answers. Slowly, I pushed the button, bracing myself for whatever would come next. The tape sputtered to life, and the melody returned. Only this time, it was clearer, stronger, as if the past was seeping into the present, refusing to be silenced. The melody echoed through the room, soft at first, but growing louder with each passing second. It was no longer just a faint tune buried beneath the static. It was alive, reverberating through the walls of the station. I felt it in my bones, like a haunting lullaby from a forgotten time. The air grew heavy, and the temperature dropped as the tape played on, the voice from the past intertwined with the eerie music. My heart raced, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to stop, but I couldn't. I was trapped, drawn in by something far beyond my control. As the melody reached its peak, the voice returned, distorted and broken. "It's too late," it whispered, the words carrying a deep sense of finality. My hands gripped the edge of the console as I tried to make sense of what I was hearing. The flood, the disappearances, the town's dark history, they all seemed to converge in this moment, as if the station itself was the key to it all. The static crackled and popped, and for a brief moment, I thought I heard the rushing of water, like the river had come alive, ready to swallow the station whole. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the tape ended. The room fell silent once more, the oppressive atmosphere lifting, but not entirely. I stared at the tape deck, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. The old reel sat there, still and lifeless, but I knew that whatever it had awakened was far from gone. I stood up, my legs weak and unsteady, and made my way toward the door. I couldn't stay here any longer. I needed to leave before the station claimed me like it had claimed so many others before. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the lingering fear. The river flowed gently beside the station, calm and peaceful once more. But I knew that beneath the surface, something dark still lurked, waiting. I glanced back at the old building, its windows dark and empty, and a deep sadness washed over me. The past couldn't be changed, and whatever secrets the station held would remain buried. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had become part of its story now. With a heavy heart, I walked away from the station, knowing that no matter how far I went, the last broadcast would always follow me.